Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York City. The show, as our audience well knows, tries to be a haven for alternative narratives to grow and help develop a more humane and transformative world, intellectually, morally, politically, and spiritually. If it stands for nothing else, the Radical Imagination looks to foster a vigorous, independent, and creative critique of society, and we try to have individuals on who live that vision. If he stands for nothing else, our guest today is that sort of rebellious and radically free, independent scholar and activist American democracy needs, even more so in the age of Trump. Our guest has been described as the country's leading legal defender of civil liberties and our most prominent scholar on the United States constitutional and criminal law. At the age of 28, he became the youngest full professor of law in the history of Harvard Law School and held the Felix Frankfurter professorship from 1993 until his retirement at Harvard in 2013. He's the author of a number of books about politics and law, including Chutzpah, Reasonable Doubts, the Criminal Justice System, and the J.Simpson Case, and a number of bestsellers, The Case for Israel, The Case for Peace, Taking the Stand, My Life in the Law, and his most recent, Electile Dysfunction, a guide for the unaroused voter. So welcome once again, and thank you so much, Alan, for being here. We are just so pleased and honored to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to an interesting series of questions and answers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we know our listeners are fully aware that you've been on the cable news shows just almost nonstop the last few days. So why don't we just start by you telling us where we're at here with these legal challenges and appeals and so on concerning the so-called ban.
What I don't like in America is that people take sides on everything. You know, they think that they're either on Trump's side or against him. So they don't analyze his executive order or the stay application in a nuanced or calibrated way. You just pick sides. It's either constitutional or it's unconstitutional. Either the stay is good or it's not good. And that's just not the right way to approach it. The order is partly constitutional and partly unconstitutional. The stay is partly based on law and partly not based on law. Trump's right about some things and wrong about other things. And so what we need is more of that kind of analysis on the one hand, on the other hand, and compared to what, which we're not getting in our polarized era now, where, you know, you vote, if you're a Democrat, you vote against the confirmation of every candidate, no matter how well qualified they are. And if you're a Republican, you vote for every candidate, no matter how unqualified they are. That's just not the way a democracy like ours should proceed.
So what is your position on these cases that are being now held, being heard concerning the so-called ban or the attempt at this ban?
I think the ban is probably lawful. I think the ban is lawful as it relates to people who have never been in the country. The family in Yemen that wants to take a trip to America, has no connections to America, seeks a visa and is turned down. They have no constitutional right to a visa. They have no standing to object. On the other hand, if you have somebody who has lived in the United States for a couple of years, gone to university, then went on a trip and wanted to come back and he stopped at the border, he certainly has a much more serious claim to being treated fairly. And so you have to look at the individuals and the class of individuals rather than just broadly asking, is the order constitutional or unconstitutional? It's a bad order. I don't like it. I don't support it. I think it sends a very negative message. But just because I don't agree with something doesn't mean I think it's unconstitutional. So I hope to present a nuanced view of this. It may not be good for television because television too likes you to pick sides. Which side are you on? Well, I'm on the
Well,
side of the Constitution.
absolutely. And life is messy, politics is messy, we understand it. But even if these people are under extraordinary duress, it's still the Constitution trumps all of that, right?
Well, the Constitution, we have a system of checks and balances.
Right.
And in a decision rendered more than 200 years ago, Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court held that the Supreme Court has the last word on defining and interpreting the Constitution and applying it to both the executive and legislative branches. We're the only country in the world that has that kind of system of checks and balances, separation of powers, and that gives the judicial branch the same status in our governance as the President of the United States, which is shocking to people around the world. Who gave a single judge somewhere in Seattle the power to stop the president from acting?
Yeah.
But that's the way our system works.
And he's done it. He's done it. Do you think it'll reach the Supreme Court?
It'll probably reach the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, of course, is deeply divided, and it may divide 4-4, which means the lower court opinion prevails. It's impossible to predict how the Supreme Court will come out in a case like this.
So we'll see what happens here. Well, another area that we wanted to talk about, and I know that you've been very, very interested in for many, many years, is freedom of speech on campus, on campuses across the country, specifically as it relates to discussions about Israel, who speaks, who gets shouted down. I'd like your take on this, and help us understand, our audience understand, the position you take concerning the so-called hard left and what you've characterized as some of the anti-Semitism on that hard left.
Well, I grew up during the McCarthy period. I was president of the student government at Brooklyn College when there were attempts by the president of the university and by professors, including Justice Scalia's father, Eugene Scalia, to try to suppress free speech. In those days, all the censorship came from the right. It came from the Catholic Church in their attempt to ban erotic movies or what they regarded as obscene movies. It came from the Republican Party. It came from university presidents who were right-wingers. And we on the left, I always consider myself left-center, we fought for freedom of speech. Today, the shoe is on the other foot. And the censorship is almost all coming from the hard left. They don't want to hear the case for Israel or Zionism. They don't want to hear that America is a decent and good country that makes mistakes and that's deeply flawed but still basically good. They don't want to hear views different from their own. They don't want to hear arguments that maybe race-based affirmative action is not the best way to proceed. They don't want to hear that a fetus may have a right to life. These are not positions I necessarily agree with, but I want to hear them. I want to hear them. They don't want to hear that the Second Amendment permits gun ownership. They want to hear an echo chamber of their own views, and they're supported by many on the faculty. The hard left faculty also supports censorship. An organization like Students for Justice for Palestine are not willing to permit pro-Israel speakers to speak on campus, even speakers like me who support a two-state solution. I'm opposed to the settlement policy. I call myself pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. Right. They don't want to hear me speak, and they try to prevent me from speaking. They try to shout me down, as they did at the University of California, as they tried to do in other places, University of Massachusetts, Johns Hopkins University, where groups of students walked out claiming I was harassing them because I wouldn't acknowledge that Israel commits war crimes. So we have a real effort to suppress free speech on campuses today. It comes from this concept called intersectionality, which argues that all oppressed groups are oppressed by the same people. Namely, women are oppressed by the same people that are oppressed gays, that oppress Palestinians, that oppress environmentalists, you name it. And that the villains are, of course, Jews, the nation state of the Jewish people, Israel, America, Western democracy, capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, you name it. And so they don't want to hear from anybody who has a different point of view. And they all get together, the oppressed groups, and they become repressive. So They call themselves progressives, but I call themselves repressive. Look, historically, the enemy of liberalism has always been the hard left, just like the enemy of conservatism is the hard right. I have much more in common with centrist conservatives than I do with Bernie Sanders, or than I do with people of the hard left. Bernie Sanders, I think about as kind of the traditional old left. But the new left, the left that's repressive, I have not only nothing in common with them, I regard them as the greatest enemies of civility, of decency, of liberalism, and of basic democratic principles. So I'm going to continue to fight hard against the hard left, and I urge my conservative friends to fight hard against the alt-right and the hard right. We have to return the debate to the center. We have to continue to have great debates between centrist liberals and centrist conservatives, and we have to marginalize the hard left and the hard right. The problem is that Trump's victory has emboldened both the hard right and the hard left. If you look at what's going on in the Democratic Party today, everybody is trying to kowtow to the hard left. Democrats didn't lose because of the hard left. They lost because they lost the center. They lost the Rust Belt. They lost working class, white, union Americans in the Midwest. And that's where they have to rebuild their party. But instead, they're trying to re-energize the hard left, which is often repressive and denying of basic freedoms.
Now, I heard you, if I remember correctly, you used three left terms here: the old left, the new left, and the hard left. Are you using it interchangeably, or what's the distinction?
No, the hard left is Bernie Sanders, maybe Elizabeth Warren. They're the conventional left-wingers who think the rich people make too much money and who think that it's important to spread the wealth more and to do a lot of things that I generally support and agree with. But they often make league with the hard left, and the hard left are the kind of Stalinists. People have always been the hard left, and in America we've always had people on the hard left who's taken advantage of any kind of turmoil we have during the horrible periods of racism in America. We still have plenty of it, but not nearly as much as we had in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The Communist Party tried to take advantage of that and organize around the race discrimination. And I think we're seeing that today. We saw that at Berkeley, where a group of hard left anarchists took over a protest trying to prevent a hard right, alt-right speaker from speaking at Berkeley. And they, burned flags and burned other things and engaged in violence. That's not liberalism. That's hard left. And the hard left, in many ways, has more in common with the hard right than either of them have with center right and center left.
And you would say that both the hard left and hard right are anti-Semitic for similar reasons, or?
It's a very different phenomenon now. It used to be that the hard right was anti-Semitic. Today they've gotten smart. The hard right, represented by Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilder in Holland, and maybe Bannon in the United States, they've learned that it's not smart to be anti-Semitic. It's not smart to go after the Jews. Hitler learned that lesson when, of course, he went after the Jews, and as a result of that, didn't get the atomic bomb, and all the great scientists left Germany, and the war might have been very, very different. I think the alt-right has learned that. And so they're no longer anti-Semitic, but they're anti-Muslim, they're anti-gay, they're anti-many other things. They're bigots. But they've excluded Jews from the realm of bigotry on tactical grounds. And
on tactical, so they are, in a sense, still closet Jew haters, would you say? Some, it's impossible to know.
Look, most bigots are bigots. And
right.
You can't know that, but I think it would be a terrible mistake for any Jews to associate themselves with bigots of the hard right just because the hard right, some of them, don't any longer target Jews. No, many on the hard right do. The guy who did the Heil Hitler salute in Washington clearly was not hiding his animus against Jews. And if you read hard right websites, you see it comes out very often. The hard left is different. They would disclaim anti-Semitism. Oh, we're not anti-Semites. We just think that pushy Jews in America are forcing the United States to support colonialist Israel.
Jewish elites. Jewish elites.
Yeah, Jewish
Yeah.
elites, or Jews like
Media,
me,
yeah, like you. Okay.
are too pushy and too aggressive and too rich and control the media. So you get the tropes of anti-Semitism coming in the guise of anti-Zionism. So we're seeing the same old problems. Look, the hard left has always been anti-Semitic. Stalin was a virulent anti-Semite.
Right.
Trotsky, though Jewish, was an anti-Semite. Don't be surprised. The Communist Party, killed Jews, intellectuals, musicians, and others. So the hard left has always been anti-Semitic. The hard right has generally been anti-Semitic. It's been the center in which Jews, liberals, others thrive, and that's why I'm trying so hard to restore the balance. I'm thinking of writing a book called Why I Left the Left but couldn't join the right, the case for the vibrant center. I can't join the right, obviously, because I support a woman's right to choose. I support gay marriage. I support gun control. I'm against the death penalty. I support separation of church and state. I support all the traditional liberal values, but I can't support the hard left's attempt to demonize Israel, to demonize America, and to demonize Western values. So I'm not comfortable anymore, either on the right or on the left. I'm comfortable in the center, and that's what I want to see.
Is there a vibrant center? Where do you see that?
We don't have a vibrant center.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't think so. I think we're losing the vibrant center.
Right.
I think the left is moving more left, the right is moving more right. I think we're seeing it all over the world. We're seeing it in Hungary and Poland. We're seeing it in Italy. We're seeing it in Greece. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it in England. Look at England. The Labour Party has been taken over by a rampant anti-Semitic bigot. And the Conservative Party has now become the home for where moderate liberals feel more comfortable. No liberal can today feel comfortable with the British Labour Party. And so we're seeing changes. And, Donald Trump understood better than some other politicians that we're going through a dramatic change, and that populism and the kind of nationalism that he promoted is rising all around the world. And he caught that wave. He caught it the way Brexit caught it. He caught it the way Polish and Hungarian and Greek nationalism are catching it. And it's a danger.
So in your mind, is Trump flirting with the hard right? Or does he try to portray himself as part of this vibrant middle? Or
he tries to be part of everything. When he refused to include Jews as those who suffered from the Holocaust, on Holocaust Memorial Day, he didn't single out the Jews. There's at least a potential argument that maybe not him, but maybe Bannon said, why offend the hard right, the alt-right? The alt-right doesn't think that Jews suffered uniquely in the Holocaust. Why not at least not provoke them? Let's not mention the Jews. Then the alt-right can like us, and we can say to the people in the center, well, we're universalists. We wanted to include everybody.
Right.
So I think he is a very clever politician who never wants to give up on any part of his base.
Mm-hmm. And Alan, you seem to have found a certain solace and energy in being one of the most articulate defenders of Israel. Where did this come from? I met you years ago, it was 2003 perhaps, when you visited Yeshiva University, where I was teaching at the time. And it seemed like you had been away from Yeshiva for a while, and there was big excitement about having you on campus. I wasn't really sure why there was such a hiatus in you not being there, but for so long. But where does this come from in your background? I know your father. There was a quote that that you yourself have mentioned, that your father was a firm, strong defender of justice, and it was the Jews' job, quote unquote, to be a defender of the underdog.
Yeah, I grew up with that tradition. Obviously, we grew up
in an Orthodox family, right?
I grew up in a modern Orthodox family.
Okay.
I hated my yeshiva, and my yeshiva hated me. I went to yeshiva all the way through 12th grade. Yeah. I was strictly Orthodox and kosher, and put on tefillin every single day until I was 27. So it
Now,
was a
why did
long.
you hate it? Why? What you use that
They
word?
hated me. I was a terrible, terrible student because I asked hard questions, and I was a
Yeah.
bandit. The rabbis hated me. In fact, the
Yeah.
principal of my high school took a train all the way up to Yeshiva University to persuade the president of Yeshiva to turn me down. I may have been the first student who ever turned down at Yeshiva University, but I was turned down, and
They regret that. That was
well,
well.
it was a good thing for me. It was a good thing for
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
I went out to Brooklyn College where I was,
Right.
top of my class, and Yale Law
Right.
School where I was first in my class. I went from C's to A's. I never got a B in my life, but I always loved my Jewish heritage. And I didn't do much on behalf of Israel until '67 because Israel was not endangered. They were not unpopular on campus. But the '67 war energized me. And then when the left turned against Israel with one of the great villains of America, Father Berrigan, who was an old-fashioned traditional anti-Semite, when he turned against Israel, I decided it was part of my life work to defend the underdog. And I listened to the teachings of Rabbi Hillel. If I am not for myself, who will be with me? But if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? And I really followed that dictum. I continued to work on behalf of other underprivileged groups, African Americans, people on death row, criminal defendants who are unpopular. But I started to devote a substantial amount of my time to defending Israel against unfair attacks. I'm critical of Israel. I was critical of its settlement policy. I'm critical of some of its governmental actions, but I think it gets a bad rap in the international community and is treated unfairly on college campuses and at the UN. And the real victim of this is not Israel. The real victim are real human rights victims. You can't get on campus any demonstrations against what's going on in Syria. You couldn't get in on Darfur or the Sudan or Cambodia. The only focus is on Israel and the Palestinians. And that's just a double standard and the
Unfair.
politicization of human rights, and it's not fair.
Now, did you also identify with the civil rights movement at the time? Because Martin Luther King was a much different African American leader, and who was certainly very pro-Israel. Would you say, pro-Zionist?
And almost all of the leaders of the civil rights movement were. I went down to the South in 1961 and 1962. I was not a hero. I participated basically as a marshal, as an observer, but I was there. And I saw some of the suffering, but everybody in those days supported Israel. Martin Luther King came to Harvard not long before he died and said, if you hear anti-Zionism, think anti-Semitism. That's what it really is. And many of the leaders of the African American community were strongly supportive of Israel. Many went to Israel, saw a commonality, and fought hard. But that's changed now. And too many leaders of the African American community have turned strongly against Israel, and there's really no justification for that.
And there was a strong identification with the Jewish prophetic tradition.
Of course.
Correct? Which I mentioned before we started the interview, Reverend William Barber has tried to carry on that tradition with his Moral Mondays movement, Repairing the Breach, also uses his revolutionary Christian message to identify strongly with the prophetic Jewish tradition, which you're very familiar with, of course, to reach out to the other and to be fair to the stranger and so on. Is that happening in Israel to the extent that you would like to see it happen? And do we need to build the dynamic center again, particularly between Jews and blacks? So where has this gone awry?
Well, I think that it is happening in Israel, and it could be more. There is a strong right wing in Israel, but there's also a strong center and left wing in Israel. The vast majority of Israelis are supportive of other people's rights. In fact, you find more pro-Palestinian attitude in Israel than you do among Jews in the United States in some respects.
Yeah.
But, Israel is a country under siege, and its children are being subject to rocket attacks by Hamas and potentially by Hezbollah. And when a country is under siege, you can't expect it to be as welcoming as at other times. I grew up at a time when anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States was so strong, anti-German sentiment, because we were at war in the Second World War with Germany and Japan. We sang ditties and songs about how terrible they were. You don't expect a country under siege to become the bastion of welcoming the enemy, but Israel more so than most other countries.
So, would you say that a transformative spiritual awakening needs to happen as both sides, is it fair to say, are traumatized people? Both sides. And how do we heal that?
Before we get a spiritual awakening, we need peace. That's the first thing we need. We need to have a two-state solution. The Palestinians have to come and accept Netanyahu's offer to sit down and negotiate with no preconditions. The West Bank has to primarily go to the Palestinians for the establishment of a demilitarized, peaceful state. The settlement blocks remain part of Israel, but in exchange for land in the north of Israel around the Afula Triangle. Jerusalem remains a united city, but with capitals for both the nation state of the Jewish people and nation state of the Palestinian people. All this is doable. All this is possible if only the Palestinian leadership would recognize that Israel is the legitimate nation state of the Jewish people and will come and accept the offers that Israel made in 2000, 2001 through Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton, in 2008 through Ehud Olmert, and Netanyahu's offer right now on the table. Palestinians should take him up on it. Sit down, negotiate. I've offered myself as somebody who could maybe help in the negotiations. I have a lot of friends in the Palestinian side. When I go to Israel, I try to meet with Palestinian leaders. I meet with them in the United States. Palestinian people are just wonderful, many of them, and they are high tech. They're very innovative and creative. Imagine what the peace dividend would look like if we could have a peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I invest in companies that have startups that have only Palestinian and Israelis working together on startups, and there are a few of them, and they've done well because the innovation on both sides is very, very great. And so the peace dividend would be enormous, particularly for the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also for the rest of the Middle East and the world.
That's terrific to hear you say that. So you sound very optimistic in the sense that the Palestinians that you have been meeting with are open to that.
They are, yeah.
They are.
Look,
and what about the resistance of the, if you will, the hard right in Israel?
Well, you have the hard right.
Do you meet with them? Do you meet with them as well?
I do meet with them.
Try to reason with them.
I've met with Bennett. I've met with most of the leaders on the hard right.
Okay.
And they don't represent the majority of Israelis on the issue of the two-state solution and peace. You know, you talk about pessimist and optimist in Israel. A pessimist is one who says, things are so bad they can't possibly get worse. And an optimist says, yes, they can. Now, I'm not an optimist in that sense. I'm an optimist in the sense that I believe that the only real solution is the two-state solution with compromises on both parts. And I think rational people ultimately come to accept solutions that are in their best interest. And it's in the best interest of both Israelis and the Palestinians to have a two-state solution.
So this concern with worldwide anti-Semitism that you've met in college campuses among some of your left colleagues in the university world, the political world. How can that be dealt with? How is it best to deal with that sort of antagonism? Where does that come from? Because many are Jewish, as you know.
Look, some of the worst anti-Semitism in history has come from Jews or former Jews. That's a historical reality. Take, for example, a professor in New York, a gay woman who invented the term pinkwashing. Pinkwashing is a statement that says, look, Jews in Israel, Israelis are very, very positive in terms of gay rights. They have more gay rights in Israel than any country in the Middle East, and actually their history is much better than the United States. They never had a don't ask, don't tell policy. So this woman agrees that Israel has the best record on gay rights. But she claims that the only reason Israel does that is to whitewash, she says pinkwash because it's gay, pinkwash what it's doing to the Palestinians. So
Wow.
by this woman's thinking, Jews can never do anything right.
Yeah.
If they do something good, it has to be for a bad motive. If they give charity, it has to be self-serving.
Really can't trust them, right?
You can't trust them. It's the ultimate act of anti-Semitism. Pinkwashing is the ultimate anti-Semitic trope.
Yeah.
And yet it was designed by a Jewish woman and published in a Jewish-owned newspaper, the New York Times. It was a disgrace that the New York Times ran that article. It was based on nothing but bigotry and hate, and yet it had legs. It carried forward. So you hear the term pinkwashing on university campuses today, and the double standard applies. People expect more of Israel because it's the nation state of the Jewish people. Well, the only people who can expect more from Israel are Israelis. The Presbyterian Church can't expect more from Israel. That's bigotry. The Prime Minister of France can't expect more from Israel. That's a double standard. Only Israelis can expect more from Israel, and they have a right to demand more from Israel, just as I, as an American, have the right to demand more of my own country, the United States.
So are we talking about deep-rooted psychological internal conflict? Or I know your friend and colleague and neighbor Jim Gilligan talks about shame and humiliation and disrespect at the core of violence. You have to understand, it's a trauma, a catastrophe that people individually and culturally have gone through. How do we begin the process of unraveling that and healing these sorts of individuals at some sort of rational level? Or is it, the university world is not doing it very well, right?
It's very hard.
Look,
anti-Semitism has been the constant in Europe. We went through a 70-year moratorium from the end of 1945, when the world realized how they had stood idly by while 6 million Jews were being brutally murdered right in front of them, often with their own cooperation. Europe ended anti-Semitism for a 70-year period. It was unacceptable for any political leaders to express anti-Semitic views. In fact, it was against the law in some countries, a law that I don't agree with, but
France,
it was against the law in Germany and other countries. Today, that moratorium has ended. And because Israel is a powerful country, maybe the 6th or 7th most powerful militarily in the world, it's an economic powerhouse, it's a technological powerhouse, the moratorium's over. And the 1,000 or 2,000 year cultural attachment to anti-Semitism is beginning to manifest and show itself all over Europe, particularly in countries like Poland and Hungary and Slovakia and Austria and some of the countries in the north, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, parts of Germany, parts of France, parts of England. It's just coming back. That's one phenomenon. Then the other phenomenon has been the increase of anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Zionism from the anti-Israel left. And you see that on college campuses, and it morphs into traditional anti-Semitism with swastikas and with other Nazi images attributed to Israeli leaders. When I spoke at Johns Hopkins University, my picture was outside the lecture hall, and it was defaced with a Hitler swastika, a Hitler mustache on my face, portraying me as Hitler. Now that's the kind of, and that came from the hard left. That's the kind of anti-Semitism we're now seeing on college campuses. So
the self-hatred, the anger and rage among some of these Jewish intellectuals and others
and also,
are finding a place in traditionally in anti-Semitic actions and language. But isn't it true also that the anti-Semite tends to be someone who also hates others, as well as hating themselves?
I think that's often the case. And, you know, people complain that Israel has turned right. Well, of course Israel has turned right because it rescued 1 million Jews from the communist Soviet Union. Don't expect people who've been oppressed by communism suddenly to become liberal leftists. But why then does the left glorify the Palestinian movement? The Palestinian movement is an extreme right-wing movement. Hamas is a fascist organization. Hezbollah is a fascist organization. The Palestinian Authority has no freedom of speech, no due process. no egalitarian notions toward women or gays or people who are not Sunni Muslims. So why suddenly has the liberal, not the liberals really, the hard left anti-Israel movement, why do they glorify the Palestinians? Why do they glorify the Iranian regime? Why do they glorify others in the Arab and Muslim world who are way, way to the right of even the most right-wing people
Whatever
in
is
Israel?
happening in Israel. Yeah.
Double standard. Yeah.
The double standard and the hypocrisy is what you're arguing there. Let me try to break it down a little more concretely. Listeners to this show know that I just want to mention this as a possible way of bringing people together here, especially Jews and blacks. I took a stand. I have no idea what you may think of the stop and frisk policies in the New York Police Department, but whatever. I had talked with a number of my students at John Jay, did some research on it, decided to act on that research, and became part of the first protest and demonstration and arrest and trial, which defended by probably a friend of yours or someone you know, Marty Stoller. What I did was, and I'll mention his name, Cornel West was part of this effort. There was 19, I guess, of us on trial. And he said, put on your kippah, which I had in my coat pocket. And I did as we were getting arrested. And the response by the community was just incredible. First of all, they thanked me, the white guy who was there, but also we're so glad to see you here, an academic, a white guy, and a Jew. Now, isn't that the sort of reaching out? And I understand there are it's not everything that I agree with what Cornel says or some of the other leaders, and certainly Black Lives Matter and so on. But isn't it important for Jews to go back to that prophetic tradition and try to make the enemy your friend and reach out to the other and identify with the suffering and catastrophe that other peoples are experiencing?
There's a right way to do it and a wrong way.
Okay.
And with respect, I don't think you did it the right way.
All right.
I have absolutely no association with Cornel West. He used to be a friend of mine. He was at my house for break fasts and for other events.
I understand.
But he has turned the corner and has associated himself with many anti-Semites. Black Lives Matter has become an anti-Semitic organization. It has as its platform calling only one country in the world a genocidal country, Israel, and calling only one country in the world an apartheid country, Israel. I support the goals of Black Lives Matter. Black lives do matter. And I support the efforts to try to create equality, but I will not join an organization or be part of an organization that calls Israel genocidal.
I agree with you, Alan. I agree with you on that.
And I have to tell you, if Cornel West had asked me to put on a kippah, I would have said, absolutely not. I am not putting on a kippah for you to give you cover for your anti-Semitism and your bigotry. I'll wear a kippah when I want to wear a kippah, not when you want me to wear a kippah. So I disagree with you respectfully.
I understand. First of all, I wasn't doing it for Cornel. I was doing it for the cause that I believed in, to stop and frisk. But
look, I agree with that.
All right. Well, that's what I did it for.
I have been writing against stop and frisk for probably 50 years. I helped write a brief 50 years ago.
Really?
Against stop and frisk when the first Supreme Court decisions came out on that. I've been teaching stop and frisk and teaching the dangers of allowing the police to create probable cause. I didn't coin the term, but I popularized the term test-aligning, how police constantly see bulges and allows them to stop and frisk people. I think it's wrong.
Right.
But I think one has to pick one's associations and pick one's causes and affiliations. And so Just
understand.
like I wouldn't, let's assume the Ku Klux Klan supported Israel, I wouldn't join a Klan march in support of Israel, and I won't join Cornel West in support of Black Lives Matter. I'll join you in support of
Okay.
Black Lives Matter. I'll join Skip Gates and Charles
Right.
Ogletree in support of Black Lives Matter, but I won't join Cornel West, and I won't join Keith Ellison, who has had long and invidious associations with the Reverend Farrakhan.
Yeah.
Just like I won't
Yeah.
join the Jewish Defense League and Meir Kahane and march with them, because I think one has to pick one's associations carefully.
I just want to make it very, very clear again that I wasn't joining any sort of organization. This was not
Right,
something
I
sponsored by
understand that.
Black Lives Matter, and it was just an independent of event that got attention and helped change the narrative, and that was what I was concerned about. And
I agree. I
and I
agree with
put
you.
it on. I'm a secular Jew, and
Yeah.
I taught at yeshiva, and I invited a lot of people there that that I wish you were around to help me. I know you would have defended their right to speak.
Of course.
I had Gary Grossman, I think was his name, one of the leading refuseniks. I had a Palestinian female physician who practiced at Hadassah Hospital there.
I defend everybody's right to speak. I defend Cornell's right
I know
to
you do. I know.
and
Yeah, that's
to
important.
say what he wants. I just won't join hands with him.
I understand.
And as long as he has also joined hands with people who call for Israel's destruction and call Israel falsely a genocidal country, I just
Yeah.
won't do that.
I understand your position, and I with all due, I don't believe he's come out and said that at all. But let's leave that as at that point, at this point here. So one of the things I also want to ask you is the influence on in your mind, in your legal work, concerning advances in the social sciences. Where does social science come in, and a better understanding of human behavior come into your incredibly important, powerful legal adventure and journey you've had?
I appreciate the question. So when I was hired at Harvard in 1964, I was called the AND professor, A-N-D professor. Why?
Yeah.
Because every course I taught was something and the law. Psychology in the law, psychiatry in the law, sociology in the law, neurobiology in the law, philosophy in the law, literature in the law, Shakespeare in the law. Every course I taught always had input.
And the Bible in the law, right?
Taught a course on the Bible in the law.
Absolutely.
See, I think the law is an empty vessel, and it has to be filled with substantive input from disciplines outside the law. So everything I teach in criminal law, in every subject, I bring in the best science, DNA in the law. Every new development in the law has relevance. Every new development in science has relevance in the law. You can't teach environmentalism in the law without looking at the science of climate change.
Exactly.
You can't look at the legal system, the criminal justice system, without reading Gilligan's work and the work of
poverty, race, and so on.
other, Jerry Skolnick and so many other sociologists, psychologists. Of course, I'm married to a PhD psychologist, and we spend a lot of time talking about the relationship between what she does with her at-risk patients. She, for years, specialized in young 15 to 16-year-old at-risk men and women, many of whom had a lot of exposure to the criminal justice system. So I firmly believe that the law without social sciences is an empty vessel, and I will continue, even in my retirement, to read widely about the impact. I just spoke the other day at a conference on modern high technology in the law, about how the law has to relate to technology, that it can't constrain it, but it also has to make sure that it doesn't get out of control and deprive us of our privacy and our other basic human rights.
Absolutely. Well, you have to have further conversations with Jim Gilligan. You probably will over the summer, because one of the things that we've been, he's a frequent visitor, a guest on the show here. And one of the things, of course, that he has been advocating is an understanding of the causes of violence, so that we literally remove the policies of punishment as we imprison people,
Mhm.
and creating these therapeutic communities, which I'm sure your wife would be also very interested in
Mhm.
showing. That
No, we both are, and we're both friendly, of course, with
I
his
know,
wife, Carol Gilligan, who's done
absolutely, absolutely,
amazing work on communications and other
absolutely,
related disciplines. So over the summer on Martha's Vineyard, the four of us frequently get together and have
right.
good substantive discussions about the future of the world.
Absolutely, absolutely, and so we might expect some sort of legal forays by you as Gilligan's work, the Gilligan's work, gets more accepted. And again, what needs to happen, I think, is the legal activist here needs to
Hmm.
enter into the fray so
Right.
that we transform the way in which we deal with these people.
I agree with you. I
All right.
agree.
Well,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I'll attend the trial for that one as you argue the case. Um, so, tell me a little about your own intellectual foundation. What are some of the things you're reading these days? What are you interested in? Please, you're not. You're the most unretired, retired public intellectual around, and you're on constantly on the shows, and you're
Hmm.
incredibly profoundly important in our public life here in America. So, as you know, left, right, the vibrant center, there is enormous concern about where this country is heading. What what are some of your intellectual foundations that give you some sort of guidance and hope here as we enter into, and that's part of the title of this show, to the age of Trump? American
Yeah.
justice in the age of Trump.
Well, I made a decision a long time ago that my life would basically be divided into the intake and the output. And for the first, 40 or so years of my life, I just read voluminously. I remember one summer reading the 30-volume works of Sigmund Freud,
Mm.
and another summer reading every word that Dostoevsky ever wrote. And I used to do that summer after summer. And, during the teaching year, I would read a great deal too. I'm now at a stage of my life where I actually write more than I read.
Hmm.
I try to write between 3,000 and 5,000 words a day.
Wow.
I read mostly for pleasure, but I write for pleasure too. And I'm always writing one or two books at the same time. And I do two or three op-eds or short articles every single week. So my days are consumed with output more than they are these days with input. When you begin to see mortality, when you begin to see the darkness rather than the light at the end of the tunnel, you want to make sure you've said everything you have to say. One of my closest friends in the world was Robert Nozick, the great, great philosopher, and
Yeah.
he tragically died at a very young age. And I spent quite a bit of time with him in his dying days. And the thing he regretted most is that he had so many ideas that he was going to die with, and that he never had an opportunity to put down so that they could survive him. And I think any intellectual wants to be immortal through his writings.
Yeah.
Those of us who don't believe in literal immortality, we want to live through our work, through our students. One of the greatest treats and gifts anybody could have is to have taught 10,000 students over a 50-year period, which is what I've done. And every day a student will write me or call me or encounter me somewhere and tell me something that he or she learned from me over the years and how they're using it in their lives. And there's nothing more gratifying than to know that your ideas continue in younger people. And so my goal over the next years is to write as much as I can, to transmit as much as my ideas as I can, and to use my experience, hopefully for the betterment of humankind. It's a high aspiration, but
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you're entitled to have high aspirations.
That's so important. That really is. I mean, the young people today are just looking for that sort of mentoring,
Mhm.
very much so. So you mentioned you're doing two books at the same time. If I can, what's the topic? What's this
Well,
interest?
this
Subject?
actually now I'm doing three.
Three. All right. We just picked up one here.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm writing a book on the trials of the Bible. I'm looking at all the um, uh, situations in the Bible where people have done things and been put on trial or should have been put on trial, and use the mechanism of the trial to try to elucidate biblical stories ranging from Cain and Abel to Abraham's sacrifice of his son to Moses' killing the Egyptian to David sending Uriah out to die so he could marry Bathsheba. And then I will put Jesus on trial and ultimately God on trial. So that's one book that I'm.
So these
very,
biblical themes
yeah,
transposed into a trial.
right.
And
Yeah.
and I suppose you're the defense attorney for
Well, I try to
for
lay
Moses or what?
sides, and
For
then
God,
I
yeah.
may do a sequel to that,
Okay.
and put literary characters on trial. I taught a course with Alan
Really?
Stone at Harvard about Shakespeare and the law, and we put Shakespearean characters on trial. Iago for the murder of Desdemona, Hamlet, so I may do a sequel on that. Those are fun books. Then I'm doing a serious book, as I mentioned before, on regaining the center, trying to retrieve the center, trying to make the case for liberalism and centrist conservatism rather than the extremes. And then my last book is going to be a memoir on defending Israel, my hardest client, and how it's changed over time, how easy it was to defend Israel in the 50s and early 60s, how much harder it's become to defend Israel. And I'm going to tell that story in memoir form.
And it's harder now because of what?
It's harder because the world is ganging up on Israel, and it's harder because
Once more, as we forget what happened in the Holocaust.
Right, and also because Israel itself is not always engaging in conduct which is easily defensible. Passing a law to expropriate Palestinian property in the West Bank, even with compensation, is not something that satisfies my liberal instincts, and I'm not going to defend Israel for doing that, nor will I defend Israel for some of its other actions, but I do defend Israel in general. So I think the memoir will tell the story of how much more complicated the defense of Israel has become. And while I'm writing those three books, I'm obviously deeply involved in writing op-eds about what's going on with Trump and with the travel ban and with the Supreme Court nomination. So I write every single day. I enjoy my writing. I write everything by hand. I don't know how to type.
Really? Yeah.
This is my wife's computer I'm using. I do not own a computer. I own an iPhone, which is about as technological as I can get, and it almost never works for me. But I do know how to Google, and I do know how to email, but I do know how to write by hand. And I have a secretary who's marvelous. She can read everything I write. And what I do is I write every day, and I fax to her. She's in Boston. She faxes back to me. For columns, I dictate. For books, I write. I listen to music as I write. I pick my music based on what I'm writing, different types of music for different types of writing. I'm a passionate music lover. My wife and I go to symphonies or string quartets 3 nights a week, probably, when we're in Florida, maybe 2 nights a week, and 2 plays a week when we're in New York. So my retirement starts at 7 o'clock at night. But I'm retired in the evening, basically, unless there are TV programs that I have to be on talking about current events. But when there's nothing in the news, my evenings are theater, opera, ballet, symphonies, chamber music, and that's a real passion.
So the Yeshiva High School graduate from Brooklyn did okay. And I in the opening, I was going to also mention that the career counselor at the high school. So this guy is very bright, big mouth, become a lawyer, as you would say. But also, what did they recommend that you go into? Funeral director?
Well, they thought I could be either an insurance salesman, an advertising executive, or a funeral director, because I was articulate, but I wasn't that smart. So that's what they thought I could be. My mother said, but he wants to go to law school. And the counselor said, but Mrs. Dershowitz, don't you understand? To go to law school, you have to go to college, and your son just isn't college material. So I barely got into college. I made it by the skin of my teeth to Brooklyn College, but then I finished on the top of my class and got into Yale Law School, where I also was on top of my class, and then I got a Supreme Court law clerkship. So I was never a B student. I went from being a C student to an A student. And I think leaving the yeshiva was important for me as it was for the yeshiva. We were not a good mix.
I tend to agree with you on that. And again, no disrespect to yeshiva, but I think you didn't disappoint your mother at all. You did. It was wonderful you went to Brooklyn. So.
I did disappoint my mother because I was no longer Orthodox in the way that she wanted me to be Orthodox. And it was always, to the day she died at 95, she was disappointed in me. Why couldn't I have remained Orthodox? Why couldn't I have followed in the tradition of her father and her grandfather? Right. And you know, it's a painful conversation, but you have to live your own life. And my life is a life in which I'm a secular Jew. I go to an Orthodox synagogue because I love the services. I love the Cantor Helfgott. I love the rabbi, Rabbi Schneier. And so I go to an Orthodox synagogue, but I don't live an Orthodox life.
I understand. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end here. I want to continue this conversation. Perhaps it's been an enormous pleasure having you on, Alan. And you know, Jim Gilligan and I are going to be teaching a year-long course at Union Theological. And maybe over the summer you will talk a little more with him. We'll have you down maybe for a lecture, which would be terrific.
I would love to do that.
That would be great.
Theological is a fantastic place, and I'd love to participate in a seminar or a course there. So
we'd love to have you.
Good.
Thank you so much. All right. All the best. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our audience. This is Jim Vrettos for the Radical Imagination. We'll see you again next week.